The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, Ph.D. It is Sunday, the 8th of March, 2026. Welcome to This Week with Mary Holland. Yes, she's back.
Glad to be back, Polly.
Oh, we're glad to have you back. Well, we did have fun with our people standing in for you, but
You guys were great. I'm delighted.
Well, we have a busy show for you today, so let's get going. It's Suzanne Burdick here in The Defender. COVID vaccine injuries to take center stage at upcoming ACIP meeting. The CDC's Vaccine Advisory Panel will consider issuing recommendations related to COVID-19 vaccine injuries, according to a notice posted in the Federal Register. The agenda signals a big change for the committee that once rubber-stamped the vaccines as safe and effective, according to Daniel O'Connor, founder and CEO of Trial Site News. Well, that's huge.
Right. So this is a piece from Trial Site, and it's exciting, Polly, that finally ACIP and CDC that it's connected to are going to be considering in a formal capacity the injuries that people have suffered from the COVID shots and potentially actually recommending that it be taken off the market. As this article points out, Robert Malone, who's a member of ACIP, hinted that if the FDA isn't going to do anything about the COVID shots, maybe the ACIP will. And there's, the American Academy of Pediatrics that we're suing, but is also suing HHS and Secretary Kennedy and the 15 states that are suing. They basically, at this point, want to disband ACIP. I think, Polly, as of today, people can still sign up to give public comments at the upcoming ACIP meeting, which I believe is March 18 and 19. So consider that. If you were injured or somebody that a loved one of yours was injured, consider looking up on the CDC website, the ACIP meeting, and signing up to give a public comment.
Michael Nevadakis here in The Defender. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. names COVID vaccine critic to CDC advisory panel. There are two new members, including a critic of COVID-19 vaccines. They're joining ACIP less than a month before the panel meets to discuss COVID-19 vaccine injuries. U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. named Florida primary care physician Dr. Sean G. Downing and Texas pediatrician Dr. Angelina Farella to the CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee. Do you know anything about them, Mary?
A little bit, Polly. We know that Dr. Farella is associated with America's Frontline Doctors, and we know that she testified to the Texas State Senate that that the COVID shot should not be allowed in the state. So I think that's going to be a pretty interesting ACIP meeting, March 18, 19. I'm sure we will be streaming it right here on CHD TV. I think stay tuned because it does look like there's preparations to make this a meaningful meeting. You'll remember that the February meeting, Polly, was canceled when things were really very hot in the litigation, which is still ongoing. The AAP litigation against Secretary Kennedy and our litigation, we have sort of a delay for a couple of months for AAP to respond. But there's a lot going on here, and I do think there may be fireworks at that March 18, 19 ACIP meeting.
Yeah, and we are streaming it on CHD TV, and Carl Jablowski, our senior science researcher, will be blogging for you all.
Fantastic.
Suzanne Burdick here in The Defender. Bizarre, creepy. Kennedy critics form Shadow Autism Research Panel. The new committee, which has ties to Dr. Paul Offit, plans to submit annual reports to Congress and issue recommendations on autism research priorities. An HHS spokesperson said, the new independent committee does not replace the official Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee, or IACC, which operates under HHS, to coordinate federal efforts on autism, including policy and government funding research.
These are just retreads. This is Dr. Offit, this is Allison Singer, this is Tom Insel. Some of these people already served on the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee in the past. These are all people very closely allied with the pharmaceutical industry. These are all people who will, to their dying day, I think, say vaccines do not cause autism, and we don't want to scare people. I don't think we're going to be quoting from them a lot, Polly.
No, I do not. All right, well, Aaron Seary here in The Defender, godfather of vaccines, tries to defend himself 8 years later. He says after his book, Vaccines Are Men, was published, I received, this is him speaking, a letter from Dr. Stanley Plotkin, and this is the first time in the 8 years since I deposed him that he has contacted me, despite his endless public and private complaints related to that deposition. But he's still able to put the truth that he was forced to admit in that deposition back in the bottle.
Polly, this is a really fascinating exchange of letters. I highly recommend that people read these. So Dr. Plotkin, 8 years later, is complaining about Aaron Seary's new book, Vaccines Amen. And I did an interview with Aaron here on CHD TV, and he's saying, you're hurting my legacy. And he says, you know, I was this poor victim in that deposition for 10 hours and I didn't have time to prepare. It's like, it's such a bizarre window into how the godfather of vaccines, the guy who writes the textbook, thinks of himself. And so Aaron's letter back is a great letter. And he says that deposition was really a testament to the damning gaps in vaccinology and the incredibly dangerous and unscientific nature of the study of vaccines. And Aaron offers to Plotkin to have a do-over. You know, you weren't happy with that deposition. Okay, come back. Bring Paul Offit. Bring Peter Hotez. It'll be just me. We'll do it again. And Aaron points out that in July of 2024, in the context of COVID, Dr. Plotkin actually did acknowledge some of the gaps in vaccinology. And Aaron Seary at the end says, you know, if you really want to ensure your legacy, and Plotkin accuses Seary of not having a legacy, and his is that he saved lots of children. And Aaron says, no, that's not the way it's going to play out. We're going to win, and your legacy is going to be in trouble. But if you want to save your legacy, Aaron says it's not too late. Just say there should be no medical mandates. You should do real placebo testing for 5 years at a minimum. You should have real post-vaccine marketing studies, and you should lift the liability shield from the 1986 Act. And apparently, Dr. Plotkin has not answered, but it's quite the interesting exchange of letters, actually.
Jill Erzin here in The Defender. Our nation is angry, exhausted, and hurting from preventable diseases. Surgeon General nominee tells the Senate. This is Dr. Casey Means, and on Wednesday defended her nomination for US Surgeon General, fielding questions on vaccines, informed consent, and her role in the administration's MAHA agenda. Means pushed back on claims that she is anti-vaccine, but said she supported vaccine policy changes made by the current administration. So a lot of people are a bit upset by Dr. Means. Mary.
Yeah. Well, Polly, she has to get confirmed. You have to remember back a year ago when Secretary Kennedy needed to get confirmed. It's a very dicey process. The job, if she gets it, oversees 6,000 people in the public health service. She definitely did not focus on vaccines. She focused on ultra-processed food, chemical exposures, inactivity, over-medicalization. That, you know, 90% of our healthcare spending goes towards chronic disease. People have metabolic syndrome. That is really her expertise, if you will, that she wrote a book essentially about food and exercise and the metabolic syndrome that apparently 93% of adults have. So let's hope, Polly, that if she does get confirmed, that she will be a bit more bold in her speaking out about the real challenges that face America's children and adults.
Okay, Child Site News here. Did a measles debate cost Dr. Ralph Abraham his job at the CDC? Dr. Ralph Abraham, the number 2 official at the CDC, resigned abruptly last month, citing unforeseen family obligations. His departure followed weeks of controversy over a Wall Street Journal op-ed on rising measles cases. What began as a scientific debate quickly evolved into a broader political battle over who controls the public health narrative. We've been discussing this while you've been away as well, Mary. Everyone feels like something iffy probably did go on there.
It certainly looks that way, Polly. As this piece by Dr. O'Connor at Trial Site News says, this looks like centralization. It looks like the White House got upset about something. They're now putting Jay Bhattacharya in charge of CDC and NIH. That's impossible, Polly. There's tens of thousands of people at both those places. It does seem like this is related to sensitivity around measles outbreaks, and that in essence, Dr. Abraham was telling the truth. You're never going to be able to keep these porous borders from bringing in cases of measles. And he said the truth of like, you're never going to be able to stop measles breakouts. It's just not going to happen. And it's also because the vaccine isn't very effective. But apparently that was not the narrative that they wanted out there. And so he's gone, which is really a shame because from everything I know, Polly, he was a member of Congress. He was the Surgeon General of Louisiana. He was very effective in those jobs. So it's disappointing, frankly.
Well, Sergi on X here, the measles moral panic by the numbers. The media wants you terrified. Let's look at what they won't tell you. The MMR vaccine associated deaths, 193 reported since 1995 versus 7 measles deaths in the same period.
He says there were 3 deaths from 2001 to 2022, and I'm sure he's not counting the West Texas deaths. Sergi's done a terrific job in a very succinct way on X. He's really explaining that there's 27 times the number of deaths from the MMR vaccine as there are from reported measles deaths since 1995. The real killers in America are environmental exposures, largely heart disease, cancer, accidents, stroke, lung disease. And what he describes, if you read through the thread, which is quite interesting, is he describes vaccination as ritual disempowerment. That's really what this is. I really like that formulation, never seen that before. And that vaccines are failing. You know, the MMR doesn't work. That's really what's going on with the measles outbreaks. And the truth is becoming too obvious to deny. So really, Sayer's been doing a really fine job on X, not only looking at the Epstein papers, but just in general, he's really doing a lot of great work.
Yeah, I could completely agree with that. Well, I just looked at this in one, Mary, that was just sent to us before, which was NBC News. ICE is confirming a measles outbreak in the nation's largest detention facility in Texas, at least 14 cases, it says.
Since when would they report on the cases of flu or the cases of a cold? You know, measles has a rash and you can figure out the strain, but it's not a deadly disease in well-nourished people. If you're in a detention center, it's probably not great conditions, sanitation-wise or in terms of crowding, but it's not something, you know, this is not a big deal, frankly.
And if you follow Dr. Ben Edwards' protocol, you will definitely be all right, is what we've heard. Brenda Belletti here. Is Dr. Mike the new anti-misinformation social media sensation? These pro-vaccine doctors hope so. MedPage Today hosted Dr. Paul Offit, Dr. Jeremy Forst, and Dr. Mike in a debate about physicians engaging with misinformation spreaders. The trio of pro-vaccine doctors lamented their lack of social media presence and said they needed to do a better job of promoting their views to a broader audience. According to Open Payments, in 2023 alone, Dr. Mike took more than $1 million in consulting fees and other compensations from Abbott Labs, whose products include the flu tests and a flu vaccine. Oh, they're getting really upset. They don't seem to be getting noticed on social media.
This is a funny one. This is really funny. So, you know, this Dr. Mike says, even though he's taking over $1 million a year from Abbott Labs, he doesn't take money from Big Pharma. I'm not sure how he defines that. And what I find really entertaining is these people don't think they have a science problem. They think they have a messaging problem. And the good news is in the pushback, first of all, it didn't get many views, but the pushback on social media is, thank God there is free speech still. And, you know, this isn't going to fly. It's not going to fly, Polly.
No. Okay. Well, Michael Nevadakis in the Defender Children's Health Defense calls for federal criminal investigation of OSHA over COVID vaccine injury reporting. Children's Health Defense is calling for the criminal investigation over a June 2021 directive suggesting healthcare employers not report workers' adverse reactions to mandated COVID-19 vaccines so as not to discourage vaccination. The call came months after the Defender, following a tip from a whistleblower reported on OSHA's directive. OSHA, by the way, stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
Right, Polly. So this is the agency that is tasked to protect the health of American workers, and it covers at least 17 million healthcare workers. And there was an official U.S. government directive that was illegal, that said, do not follow the law and report vaccine injury. And apparently in 2003, they'd issued a guideline specifically to say you must report vaccine injury. They said, do not report this because it might discourage vaccination. I mean, literally likely causing some deaths, Polly, let alone injuries. So I'm really glad that we sent this letter to OSHA. We will obviously be continuing to keep you abreast of what happens.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about the COVID justice resolution. For years, Americans have waited for an honest reckoning with the COVID-19 response, one grounded in reality rather than excuses or institutional gaslighting. Instead, the nation endured the most sweeping suspension of civil liberties in modern history, driven by emergency powers that lacked evidence. This proposed Senate resolution is a first step towards clarity, and children's self-defense is a part of this collaboration, proudly part of this collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. So Michael Kane in advocacy at Ph.D. has really been leading the charge on this. Jeffrey Tucker at Brownstone Institute wrote this resolution, which is really excellent, talking about the masks, the lockdown, the censorships, the mandates, but also Health Freedom Defense Fund with Leslie Manookian, Stand for Health Freedom, Autism Action Network, Independent Medical Association, plus many, many other supportive groups. And we already have, Polly, over 25,000 signatures. But please, if you're watching and you haven't signed the petition, you can find it in the show notes. Please do. This is the last opportunity, probably, Polly, by these midterm elections in 2026 to really pay attention to what happened in COVID and at least get a statement from the Senate, from Congress that says we will never do that again, right? We're not asking for a lot. We're just asking for them to acknowledge everything that happened was unconstitutional. It violated the most basic premises of our civil rights. And they should, at a minimum, just say, we're not going to do it again. So please sign the petition. I think it's important.
Yeah, please do. All right, let's go to the World Health Organization on X. HPV vaccine is highly effective. The vaccine protects against the high-risk HPV types 16 and 18, which cause most cervical cancers and have been shown to be safe and effective in preventing HPV infection and cervical cancer. And it goes on.
On and on. So, this is just the World Health Organization really promoting these vaccines. It's a moneymaker. It's harmful. Kids die from it. It doesn't work. So it's just propaganda, Polly. It's just straight up propaganda.
It is. And we really should send the Gardasil section of the Vax 2 movie to them to see actually how many died and are crippled from that vaccine. It's just a tiny fraction of how many. Well, staying with HPV vaccine, we've got Counterview here. Vaccination versus screening, policy questions raised on cervical cancer strategy. A public policy expert has written to Union Health Minister JP Nadda, raising a series of concerns regarding the national HPV vaccination campaign launched on February 28th for 14-year-old girls.
So this is a very good report from a Dr. Reddy in India, pushing back against an effort by the Ministry of Health to vaccinate 14-year-old girls. It's interesting, they're using Gardasil 4, not the newer Gardasil 9, which is the only one in the US, but it raises issues around cold chain, preserving the vaccines in a way that, they're supposed to be preserved, adverse event reporting, strain diversity, absence of any kind of baseline, issues around informed consent, issues around screening as a better alternative. This is a really good pushback. And historically, Polly, there were scientists in India who pushed back really hard. And you'll remember that our friend Bill Gates and a group called PATH did essentially clinical trials in India on the Gardasil vaccine, and several girls died, and there was a parliamentary inquiry. So India is skeptical of the HPV vaccines, for which I'm grateful, and I'm really happy to see that this doctor is pushing back against what the ministry seems to be doing.
Well, staying with HPV, Brenda Belletti here. Expert Guts claims that HPV vaccine reduces cancer risk. The widely circulated claim that the HPV vaccine dramatically reduces cervical cancer risk by as much as 80% if administered before age 16 collapses under closer examination, said Lucija Tomajenovic. So I do apologize if I said that wrong. In an interview, she said safety and efficacy claims are unsubstantiated and the benefits of the vaccine do not outweigh the risks.
So Lucia Tomlanovich has been a very important scientist on vaccines and on the HPV vaccine in particular. And she did work in Canada with Dr. Chris Shaw. She's now back in Croatia. She was on this very important Croatian podcast, like what we do. And yes, she is absolutely qualified. She says that some recent meta-analysis, they're based on lousy studies, so garbage in, garbage out. We have tracked the known side effects. She points out that Julie Gerberding, who left the CDC as the head of CDC and went to Merck Vaccines when they really were pushing HPV vaccines, Gardasil, that woman is now, has over $100 million to her name. Far safer and more effective than the HPV vaccine is simply Pap screening, which has been happening for 75 years. It's just proven effective, it's inexpensive, and it doesn't cause death, which the Gardasil vaccines can do.
All right, Michael Nevadakis here. Congress restores funding to Fauci-linked research. Is it gain of function? Congress is still funding a federal program established by Dr. Anthony Fauci to support emerging infectious disease research, despite cuts implemented last year by the Trump administration and the NIH. The Disinformation Chronicle reported on Wednesday that $18.2 million was slipped into the appropriations bill for fiscal year 2026.
Yeah, this is bad news, Polly. So this is by our friend Paul Thacker on the Substack Disinformation Chronicle. It's certainly true that the acting head of NIAID, where Fauci was head for many years, is a guy named Dr. Taubenberger, who was a very strong proponent of gain-of-function research. As Brian Hooker, our science director, says, it doesn't say that it's explicitly for gain of function, but it wouldn't be that hard to hide this in it. And this tranche of money, Creed, was used to basically pay Peter Daszak and Dr. Anderson, who were pretty clearly paid off for writing a fraudulent paper called The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2. So this is bad news. It's bad news that things are still happening at NIH that are not what we would want to see happen.
Right, Brenda Belletti here. Hep B vaccination rates for newborns plummet as debate heats up. There is a struggle brewing over the science behind the Hep B vaccine, said Children's Health Defense senior research scientist Karl Jablonski, after a report this week that Hep B vaccination rates plummeted 10 percentage points over 2 years. Health officials in the West African country of Guinea-Bissau cancelled a controversial study designed to test the safety of the vaccine.
The U.S. Health and Human Services had put some money towards this study in Guinea-Bissau because apparently they were in a transition period and they were going to sort of increase, I think, Hep B, or they were going to study it. And I'm glad that the study's not going to happen, because it was a study that I don't think any babies, newborns, I think it's unwise for newborns or, within 4 weeks or 8 weeks to be getting a hepatitis B vaccine when the babies are at zero risk of hepatitis B. The decline of 10% is a good sign. I personally, they've now put hepatitis B, the ACIP recommendations, or the HHS recommendations, have now declined, and Hep B is now one of the vaccines that's subject to shared clinical decision making. I personally think it's a crazy vaccine, absolutely crazy vaccine, high in aluminum, given on the day of birth before you even have any idea what the baby's medical issues are, is just crazy.
All right, this is People magazine. CDC issues travel advisory for 32 countries, including several in Europe, over spread of paralyzing disease. CDC is encouraging Americans traveling abroad to make sure they're up to date on their polio vaccines. And I just want to make a thing that if you decide that's what you want, be very careful, because I just wrote this down. They could give you the Kinrix, which is actually DTaP and polio. They could give you the Pediarix, which is actually DTaP, Hep B and polio. Or they could give you the Pentasal, which is DTaP, Hib and polio. Or they could give you the Quadricel, which is DTaP and polio. So don't think if you're just hopping in there for a quick bit of polio that you're going to get it. You're more than likely going to get one of those ghastly things.
If you really do a deeper dive on polio, and there's lots of great sources on that, there were some great pieces on Age of Autism. You can look on our website. There's a 150-page chapter in Turtles All the Way Down that I edited. You're very unlikely to get polio unless you have some other factor like spraying of DDT pesticide or something along those lines.
Well, guess who's coming on CHD TV tomorrow morning to discuss this exact.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Dr.
Dr.
Humphreys will be
Perfect. That's great. Super. Super. Glad to hear that.
This is a Defender article by Kim Rossi, who I adore, this mother who's been in the game a long time with us, Mary.
Me too. Me too.
And she has 3 daughters that have been injured. And she writes this article, Safety Net Full of Holes, leaves many mums of kids with autism to face poverty. The autism epidemic has created a pink-collar ghetto, an under and unpaid kitchen table industry that has gutted a generation of women's earnings. We have to create a fair and reasonable system to compensate mums whose social security hours were wiped out by autism. I love this article. I love her. And I think I really highly recommend
you read it. No, me too. In fact, one of our staff members, Polly, sent this to me and I sent it right away to Defender that we have to look at this. And it's absolutely true. And Kim is a wonderful, wonderful woman and an amazing editor at Age of Autism. And she said, you know, without the moms, the world of people with autism would collapse. I mean, that's true. And she says, we need to honor the sacrifice, which every one of us would make again for our children. So she's not saying that the moms did the wrong thing, but she's saying you have to acknowledge all of this unpaid labor in every way, not only to protect the kids, but also all of the people who, she starts this article because she was potentially going to be on the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee. But, you know, the social groups, the taco groups, the gatherings, the supporting one another, it all takes a lot of work. And it's the moms who've done the work, and their sacrifice does need to be acknowledged and ideally must be compensated in some way. And I think she's raised a really important topic.
All right, Jill Erzin here in the Defender. We've addicted our farmers to glyphosate. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tells Joe Rogan he called glyphosate a poison and questions its safety, even though he defended President Donald Trump's order to expand domestic production. He told Joe Rogan that reliance on Chinese supplies threatens national security, but insisted the US must ultimately transition off of glyphosate through regenerative farming and new technology. He knows, doesn't he? He knows.
Oh, Bobby Kennedy absolutely knows the truth. And as he said here, he was not aligned with this decision, to put it mildly. I mean, there's no way. He litigated against glyphosate, right? He was part of the winning team that got billion-dollar judgments against Monsanto, now Bayer, for causing cancer, and they knew they were causing cancer. And he says, you know, the liability shield that this executive order puts in place takes away any incentive for further to make the product safer. So Kennedy absolutely knows that there's a problem, but by the same token, he works for the president. That is how he has his job. And it is true that American farmers, in particular people raising corn and soy and wheat, are extremely dependent on glyphosate. And it is true that 99% of it comes from China. So there is a real issue here about the food supply, especially as we enter into a world of war. But it's not good news. Regenerative farming is definitely the answer. And there's a little bit of work being done in that through the Rural Health Initiative.
Power lines and tablets linked to brain cancer in children. Electromagnetic radiation from power lines and tablets may increase children's risk of central nervous system tumors, according to a peer-reviewed study published in Environmental Research. Central nervous system tumors such as gliomas are the second most common childhood cancers, the authors wrote in their report, which is concerning because power lines are everywhere and the kids are addicted to tablets. So
it's very concerning, Polly. And, you know, the reason that we're so involved in looking at the issues of electromagnetic radiation and their effects on children. This is very concerning. And fortunately, there's some really good work being done on this. But there, in this article, it mentions that by 2021, pre-COVID, 96% of schools were supplying children with devices, whether it was tablets or computers or whatnot, So this is a big issue around children's health that was poorly studied. Gliomas, I think, is the name of these often, brain cancers, spinal cancer. So this is definitely something we have to be better understanding.
Brenda Valletti, EPA's bid to overturn landmark fluoride ruling based on process, not public health concerns. EPA asked the Federal Appeals Court to overturn a groundbreaking 2024 decision requiring it to regulate fluoride in drinking water, not by challenging the court's finding that fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk to children's health, but by arguing the judge overstepped her procedural bounds.
It's pretty shocking. So this is big chemical, and they realize that they can't really challenge the judge based on the science. But what this judge did, looking at a very unique section of the Toxic Substances Act, Section 21, that judge gets to look at the issues de novo. He gets to look at it from the get-go. He doesn't have to take whatever the EPA said. He can look at it himself. And in that process, he basically heard, oh, the National Toxicology Program is doing a big study on fluoride. I'm going to hold off on ruling until I get that NTP study, which is common sense, right? And so the people, the EPA itself, with a lot of influence, no doubt, from big chemical behind it, is saying, oh, the judge didn't really have that right. And, we should really the trial should be extended, and he should have to go look at what the science was in 2021. And I really like this quote from a lawyer involved in this. He says, if the law disallows this, then there's something wrong with the law. And also, what's so discouraging here is right now, as this lawsuit goes forward, there's a little bit analogous to what's happening with Bayer and Monsanto and glyphosate. There are big efforts in Congress by advocates for big chem to overhaul this statute, the Toxic Substances Act, to prevent this kind of lawsuit itself. So, there's a reason why we have to fight. I wish we didn't have to, but there are big financial interests that really don't care if people get hurt.
Clearly. Well, that's it for our news this week. It's lovely to have you back, Mary.
Great to be back.
And we're going to go to our geoengineering now. But I will see everybody tomorrow with Dr. Suzanne Humphreys. And thank you very much. Pray big, everyone. Stand firm. Never settle. Mary and I'll see you next week.
Hey guys, I'm Augustus DeRico, the founder and CEO of the cloud seeding company Rainmaker. Rainmaker does not conduct geoengineering or solar radiation modification to dim the sun and cool the planet down. We're a cloud seeding company, which means we work with natural clouds to help them precipitate more rain or snow.
The American people, do they have the God-given right to clean air, clean water, clean crops?
First of all, I and we at Rainmaker agree that everybody has a God-given right to clean air, clean water, and clean crops. And if you look at the state of our country right now, our forests and cities are on fire because we don't have enough water. Our crops and harvests are failing because we don't have enough water. Ecosystems throughout the US are collapsing because they don't have enough water. I'm going to the Great Salt Lake tomorrow. Google what the Great Salt Lake looks like. It could dry up entirely over the course of the next decade. What we want, what we think everybody in the country wants, is a future where we have enough water for our forests to be green, for our farms to be lush, and for kids to grow up swimming in the lakes that their parents did. That's basically the only thing that I care about right now, making more fresh water.
They'll trot somebody out like Augustus DeRico, and they've done this in the past. Maybe it wasn't quite as nefarious at the time with Wallace Howell, who was a rainmaker in the 1950s in New York City, and also in Pennsylvania and other parts of New York, where he was involved with a handful of lawsuits with farmers who accused him of, really messing with their crops. And it's funny, when I've pointed that out in the past to Augustus DeRico and maybe some of his team members, they've placed the blame. It's funny, like on the farmers, calling them opportunistic farmers looking for someone to blame for bad weather and crop loss. And I think you can start to get like a picture as to where this is headed when you start looking at it from that perspective, because this is as much about, our food supply and our biology as much as it is about controlling the weather. And I think that's, again, this darker side of it, which they're using, young, pretty faces like Augustus DeRico's to mask all of it. It's like, he can come out and make this nice argument and say it's super great, and we should do this. We have to do it actually if we're going to save the planet. But then again, nobody's looking at the nitty gritty and what's causing the larger problem in the first place.
And these civilian figures, Polly, are elevated in the corporate press. For example,
Yes.
the Wall Street Journal just ran a feature story on Augustus Dorico and Rainmaker just a couple of months ago. And there's now an iconic image of Augustus with the mullet and the baseball cap and the American flag and the Jesus cross and every single symbolic trope we can bring to bear in a single image to make cloud seeding and geoengineering look good to as large a swath of the American public as we can potentially appeal to, the better. It's really, from a propaganda point of view, Polly, it's really quite fascinating.
Now, how are they selling him, though? What is he saying that's making people go, I've got to follow him? This is good. What is the other side?
Yeah, they're saying that it's going to solve the drought issue. For example, in Utah, where they do have a drought issue. They have a water problem throughout all the American West, for that matter, which to name states, it's Colorado, Idaho, Utah, California, and Texas, which, that's another thing Dorico has said. That's like a very politically diverse group of states in the country, which he's making the point that what he's doing isn't necessarily a political issue, which it's funny that he says that, because I say the same exact thing about geoengineering as a problem. Overall, it's not necessarily a political issue of left versus right, and that's honestly, that is where Augustus does come in and Rainmaker does come in, and they make those sales, if you will, based on that. Because you look at a state like Utah, which is very conservative, a very conservatively minded state, they're like kind of excited about something like cloud seeding, and they're saying, man, maybe this is something we should do to solve this drought issue. But then you look at a state like California, which is not that. They're kind of looking at it not necessarily from a drought, but more from a climate change perspective as, hey, is this a viable option to solve some of our water scarcity issues? Which, of course, again, we'll make the case at our geoengineering age that the drought that you're seeing in California, a lot of it is a result of clandestine military geoengineering operations that are taking place off the coast of the state. And then they're also happening inland throughout the entire American West. And that's one of the challenges that's kind of causing the drought out there. But that's how Augustus is being sold. He's being sold as a solution to water scarcity. If you've seen some of their propaganda, some of their marketing, it's like, cloud seeding is the way, and water abundance, and like he'll often sell it from a perspective of like it's stewarding the earth and like a Christian kind of perspective, which again I wholeheartedly disagree with. I don't see that in any way, shape, or form. But that seems to be how he's meeting people. It seems to be, in states like Utah, like it's stewarding the earth. This is creating water abundance. We're solving this problem. And then in states like California, it's climate change and water scarcity and that kind of thing.
And we can go toe to toe with Rainmaker on biblical conversation too. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Humans are called to steward the earth and all of its creatures. And weaponizing the weather is not the way to do that, Polly. I think we can
with
probably
drones.
100%. So basically, summarizing this up, it is like the vaccines. They're creating the problem and they're offering the solution.
Exactly.
Hegelian
Exactly
dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. Problem, apocalyptic, human-caused climate change, Polly. Reaction, we should be terrified. Right? Think Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's film from 2006, which has been completely discredited, by the way. And solution, we can control the weather. We can manipulate weather, and we can modify climate globally. And this is all happening without a shred of public conversation or debate.
So can you tell everyone your name, please?
Diane McCallum.
And this is about your husband. Here's a picture of him. There he is.
Yes, William McCallum.
There he is, everyone. Okay. Did your husband take the COVID vaccine?
No.
Why did he not take the COVID vaccine?
He was a very firm believer that you don't add things to your body that haven't been tested. And we didn't have any of the results that it was actually doing anything positive.
So, did he have one of those pulse things measuring his oxygen on his finger?
He did, yes, he had a oxygen meter.
And so, is that what made him go into hospital?
Yes.
Okay. So, what was it measuring at? Do you remember?
It was going in the 80s, and we couldn't get it back up to the 90s. And that's when the doctor said, you have him go to the hospital. I didn't know, and no one told us that he could have just had oxygen at the house.
Yeah.
Hindsight.
I know. So you weren't allowed in with him.
No.
And so were you communicating with him by text?
He had a really great nurse when he first was at the hospital, and the nurse sent a photo of him with his oxygen on. Sorry.
Okay.
Just brings back all these memories. And he looked so good. His color was up, he's smiling, he's waving. I have that photo. And so I thought, oh, okay, he's getting oxygen. I'm going to pick him up on Monday. That's his term. And so this whole thing was such a shock over the weekend, you know, to have him call and say he's not going to make it. I was like, what? We'll get there in a minute.
Okay, so there's two sides of the story before you got the medical records. So let's carry on with this. So basically, he goes in. Did they give him remdesivir?
They did, which I didn't realize till after. But on the first, the page of his medical shows that he got 2 doses of remdesivir and 2 doses of baricitinib, the generic for remdesivir, in one day. So technically 4 doses in one day, and 2 more the next.
And all his symptoms
he needed oxygen. That's all he needed, oxygen.
Okay, so when did the communication with him stop?
They were putting him into a room on Saturday. So when he first went to the hospital Thursday night, there was not a room, and he was in, I believe he was in the emergency room, like one of the rooms off. And so they were putting him up on like the 3rd floor.
And that was the last you heard from him?
No, I was able to go in then when they called and said that he wasn't going to make it.
I don't understand why he went in with just needing some oxygen to how many days later that he wasn't going to make it?
3, 4 at the most. Yeah.
Well,
So he went in Thursday night, and by Saturday, and then Sunday morning they're calling and telling me.
Right, so viewers, you're not going to be able to see this terribly well, and we will get this properly filmed for you. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so this is actually shocking that you see on the few days that he was sort of in hospital. So there's some notes there, but basically you can see how much money they're making off every single little thing that they give him, William. You know, all the way, every time he has this remdesivir, a dose of remdesivir, $6,455. Lots of chest with contrast. So they're really, if you look at this, they're really giving him everything they can and charging. But there's a bit of a shocker, I have to say, having looked through quite a lot of these hospital protocols with these stories we're doing. I don't even know what room step downs means, but there's a lot of 6,445 room step downs. Then there's all these drugs and drawing fee and going on and on and on and on. And then there's this, $26,423. Look, whatever that is, TOCILIZUMAB. Toby looked it up, and what do you remember what it does? Somebody look it up now. Lots of lorazepam, which, you know, I don't know what all these drugs do, but we know it's not good at chest X.
For arthritis.
Yeah, so it's a drug they use for arthritis. This $26,000 drug is for arthritis. But what else can it do?
But he wasn't diagnosed with
He
with
didn't have arthritis.
he didn't have arthritis. I mean,
But there's got to be a reason. It's got to be something else. I mean, for 26, I can't even get over that.
Slows a decrease in lung function.
It slows a decrease in lung function. Well,
For patients with lung disease.
with patient with lung disease. Okay, so he's had a lot of remdesivir. Now
To
we're getting the
create-
fentanyls coming in now. We're starting to see fentanyl, and also the midazolam. I can't say that very well, but the British know all about that. They were chucking that down the people in England. And then we get onto all of these drugs that we all know knock you out. All of this, look at it all of it going down, charging a fortune. Midazolam again, and then there's another $7,000 there for a different room they were putting him in. God knows what that's all about. And it just goes on and on. I got more and more drugs. Midazolam, fentanyl, this one here that knocks you out. Fentanyl, and on and on and on it goes. It goes right up. And we're going to get back to the story, but I just wanted you all to see what they're throwing into these people, and there we have it. $181,610 is how much they made out of your husband. And you also have here, don't you, a load more fentanyl stuff. There's more. Look at all this, people. All of this with fentanyl.
he was a good person. He told me once, that when you take an oath to, he was in the Air Force, and that when you take an oath for the Air Force, it's not just for your term, but it's for life. So he always did good things for people. And after he died, I even had calls from people that I didn't know some of the things, and I got some very nice calls from people that he had organized things to help. Also, I could go into detail, but it was just really sweet. I appreciate those calls.
So were you actually with him when he passed?
Yes.
So they called you. Talk us through what happened.
So when they called at like 2 a.m. on that Sunday, and the doctor was screaming in the phone, and I was so surprised. And I said, "Wait, what's going on?" And she said, "Your husband's not going to make it." And I said, "What do you mean? I'm bringing him home on Monday," because I had no idea that he wasn't even doing well. I thought he was getting better. And she said, I said, "I'll be there in 5 minutes. I live close." And she said, "He's not going to make it." And I said, "Yes, he will." And then it dawned on me. I said, "Where are you calling me from?" And she said, "Oh, I'm in his room." And I said, "Get out of his room." So here he's heard this whole conversation. So I get to the hospital, and he was so upset. I have never seen my husband like this, because he thought he was going to die. And I could not relax him. I couldn't get him to calm down. And actually, that was the second call. I kind of jumped ahead. We'd had a call earlier doing the same kind of thing, saying, he's not going to make it. And I rushed down there, and I actually had the neighbor drive me, because I was afraid to drive at that point, because this was so shocking. And again, I knew that my neighbor stays up late, and she was home, so she drove me. And when I got to the hospital on that one, he just looked so bad. He was blown up, and he just didn't look like himself. And then I said, "What happened?" And he said, "You're better and I'm worse." And that's like the last thing that he basically said to me. There was one other thing, but I said, "Have they rolled you over?" Because my friend said that if they do proning, where they lay on their stomach for their lungs to give relief, and he said no. So I went out and I said to the nurse, "Let's roll him over." And she goes, "Well, that takes 2 people." And I said, "I'm here. I'll do it. Let's do it." And then she kind of rolled her eyes, and she came in, though, and she got the bed sheet, and I said, "Honey, we're going to roll you over. You're going to feel better. I need your help." And so he did. We rolled him over onto his stomach, and his oxygen went up immediately. And then I stayed another hour. I think then it was like 2 a.m. And his oxygen was high 80s. And I couldn't find anything in the paperwork here to show that. But I said, okay, I'm going to go home. You're going to sleep. You're going to be better. I'll see you in the morning. And then that's when I got that second call, and he had rolled back to his back. And I thought, well, let's roll him over again, you know. But after the doctor did that horrendous, he's not going to make it. He thought he wasn't going to make it. And he said, I need to be intubated. And I went, no, you don't. And in his mind, he heard her say he needed to be intubated, and he was going to go with what the doctor said. And when I got to the hospital, I asked if that doctor was there. And I said, I don't ever want her in his room again. That was just so upsetting. But going in the first time, again, I'm backtracking, the first call, when I got to the hospital and I went up the elevator, this doctor came in with a white coat, and I have his name, and there was a woman with him that just had a suit on. And I'm the only one in the elevator, and he turns around, he looks at me, gives me eye contact, and then he says loud enough that we both hear him, well, we're going to lose everyone on this floor anyway. And he could see the floor I had pressed, the buttons lit up, and he gets off on that floor, and they stop at the room right before my husband's room. And that woman did in fact die as well, right before my husband. But when I had contacted it was suggested that I file a complaint with the Department of Health, and I did last year, and then it took like 6 months, and a woman did call me in September and said she was headed out to check things out. And I said, could you just find out if everyone on that floor had been non-vaxxed? Because the doctor seemed 100% positive that we were going to lose all the people on that floor. And I'm just curious if we did. But she never called me back. I think I have my answer. I think right now the most difficult thing is getting people to believe that this could have been prevented. And the hospital COVID protocol paid for another wing of the hospital. It's very difficult to accept that.
What hospital was that?
Clovis Community.
Say it again?
Clovis Community. And my husband had an excellent doctor and an excellent nurse in ICU. I can't say enough good about those two. They were wonderful. But when I kept saying, give him ivermectin, please. And the nurse said, and here we're in ICU, the door's closed, it's just my husband, she and me. And she looked back to make sure no one could see her lips, and she said, Diane, I can't even get ivermectin or I'll be fired. What a sad state of affairs. So.
Yeah, but I know that you think they're lovely nurses and stuff, but I'm sorry. They need to put human life before their job. So if you get fired, fine, but your husband lives.
People should have spoke up sooner.
That's the problem.
Yes.
What do you want people to know about the story? Because you've come here to talk about the story of William, and we're going to put his photo up, we're going to remember him, we're going to put it right up on the bus. But what do you want people to know from this loss, tragic loss?
Not to chalk it off that, oh, he had COVID. Oh, it was, he blew up like that, and his lungs looked like that, and his liver stopped because of COVID. No, it wasn't because of COVID. It was because of the drugs they gave him. The remdesivir, the barcinetib, and I'm sorry, 6 doses in 2 days. They didn't plan for him to come home. And that's just shocking to me, because you take a Hippocratic oath to preserve life, protect. My husband was the first one to stop if there was someone that needed help.
He was a Scot.
He was born in Scotland, and has a lot of cousins there. But he was U.S. citizen and in the U.S. Air Force for 10 years. We were married for 30. And I was lucky to have known him for 30 years.
We're really sorry this happened.
My grandkids still, the little one talks about him a lot. She's 8 now, but they were very close. The 11-year-old he just said the other day, what are we going to do? That Grandpa's not here to show the baby how to go fishing and how to drive the boat and, all these things. I said, but we'll show her pictures and we'll give those memories to her.
It didn't need to be. Well, thank you so much for telling your story. I know it's
Thank you
painful.
for
Really
asking.
appreciate it.
It's nice to get it off my chest.